What's up guys, hello to Footballtalk here, and it's playoff time. This was one of the wackier regular seasons that we've seen in some regards, and it's left us with a very interesting, unexpected field of 14 teams. That's best indicated by the fact that two teams that had already been eliminated for a month plus ultimately decided the winner of the NFC South in the early slate on Sunday in favor of the Panthers, while a missed field goal to cap off a wild Sunday night affair in Pittsburgh determined that the Steelers would host a postseason contest of their own as the AFC North champs. Personally, I felt pretty good about having picked the Bears to win the NFC North and the Patriots to make the playoffs, while I had the Lions and Commanders missing out in my preseason predictions, but this play I got wrong as well. So as I do every year, I will go through the actual playoff bracket, give a short summary of each team, and then pick every game based on where I see certain advantages one way or the other, until we get to who will hoist the Lombardi Trophy in Super Bowl 60. Obviously, since I'm recording this already early on a Tuesday, we don't have any injury reports or other potential news yet, so just keep that in mind if anything were to come up throughout the week. But let's now start with the wildcard round, and in particular on the AFC side of things, with the 2-7 matchup as the 14-3 New England Patriots host the 11-6 Los Angeles Chargers. As we go for each of these teams individually, I will throw up a graphic for them, showing expected points added per play and success rate on dropbacks and design run plays on both offense and defense, meaning you're consistently based on down and distance, while EPA weighs explosive plays and turnovers more heavily. Plus, I added one more key statistic that I believe speaks to either side of the ball for them. But first, I always want to quickly bring up how each team got here. The Chargers' road to this point is sort of unanticipated, because they started off 3-0, but then lost 3 of the next 4, including against the Giants and Commanders, but more importantly ended up being without the 2 starting offensive tackles, which combined with an already bad interior O-line, it felt like Justin Herbert was just fighting to survive at times. And yet, they won 7 of the next 8 and ended up sending the banged up quarterback in the regular season finale. Offensively, it's still totally fair to question what the ceiling of a team with this type of front 5 looks like, since they'll be at a disadvantage against whomever they may face in the postseason, as they finish the year dead last in both PFF's run and pass blocking grades respectively. That's almost unheard of, especially for a playoff team. Herbert has done wonders to overcome collapsing pockets, at times ripping throws with defenders already wrapped around his legs. While there's been more volatility from the individual pieces as the season has gone along, I do think the construction of the receiving corps makes more sense than it has in the past, however. And since the Week 12 bye, the run game has at least been average based on expected points added, with a handful of explosive provided by rookie Omarion Hampton. The key stat for the Bolts offense though, they've converted third downs at nearly a 48% rate, third highest in the NFL, and overall they've been one of the best short yardage teams in general, even if it hasn't quite translated fully into red zone success. If you go by the advanced metrics, the Chargers defense has been almost identical in these 2 years under coordinator Jesse Minter, ranking top 6 in both EP per play and success rate overall. They've shown a variety in the coverages they've thrown out there, and in season 2 of this regime, we've seen more game plan specific details, which although it's close, has helped them allow the lowest passer rating of any team in the league. Tuli Tuipulotu has stepped up as the most effective pass rusher, Derwin James looks as comfortable as ever as a chess piece for that unit that they deploy in various ways, and the range of Diane Henley on the second level has made them feel so much more dynamic these past 2 years. If you can simplify things on the back end by staying ahead of schedule and keeping play action on the table, a lot of these longer DBs thrive more in the early portion of the play clock than when you're able to isolate them down the field, but that's easier said than done. One more note on them, kicker Cameron Dicker came into that Week 17 Texans game having gone 16 out of 71 on all kicks attempted, before missing both a field goal and an extra point in a game that the Chargers lost by 4 points. Do they have the edge in that department, or could that maybe linger in the back of his mind? For the Patriots, it's been a miraculous turnaround, adding a full 10 wins to the 2024 total, fueled by Drake May having taken a huge step forward in his sophomore campaign, with a way more competent coaching staff around him, since he lost 2 of the first 3 games against the Raiders, who were about to pick first overall in the draft, and a Steelers team that forced 5 of the 16 turnovers for the season in that one game. The only losses come in a rematch with the Bills, which led 21-0 at one point. Despite some of the highly inefficient early down rushing outings over the first half of the season, this New England offense somehow finished the regular season as number 1 in EP per play overall. They ended up behind only the Rams at nearly 29 points per game, and tied them atop the league at 6.2 yards per play. May has been the most accurate deep pass in the league, with Josh McDaniels providing the structure to succeed within, and deploying receiving corps largely consisting of role players in a way that makes a lot of sense. They can condense the formation, take shots of play action, or spread out opponents in empty, and provide their QB space to operate. The one weakness of New England's pass game has been the vulnerability to taking sacks. 48 in fact, which is the highest mark for playoff quarterback other than Justin Herbert on the other side of this, which I've pointed out already how it's been one of the most heavily pressured passes in the league. Having said that, Drake has really prioritized maximizing plays, with a lot of those sacks coming on third downs when he would otherwise punt the ball anyway, and even then they rarely end up costing a whole lot of yardage. And although facing the three AFC East foes with struggling run defenses has certainly helped, I was shocked to find out over the past 4 weeks, this team ranked second in rushing success rate, with the Thunder and Lightning dynamic Ramondre Stevenson and rookie Trevion Henderson. On the opposite side of the ball, the Pats quietly ended up as the 4th best scoring defense in the league at just under 19 points per game, thanks to how well coached they are situationally, and the fact they missed the fewest tackles in the league overall, according to Pro Football Reference. Designated defensive coordinator Terrell Williams has been away from the team pretty much all season, but the man in charge, Zach Kerr, has generally done a very good job with that unit, especially when it comes to limiting explosive plays, with just 4 total of 40 plus yards. Outside of cornerback Christian Gonzalez, this may not be a star-studded unit, but they threw a lot of looks at opponents up front, they're getting healthier, and they hit everything that moves. The two worrisome areas for them, they're one of the worst units at keeping opponents out of the end zone once they make it inside the 20, and the run defense has gone from near the top of the league for the first to the bottom of the second half of the schedule. The Chargers absolutely hammered the Pats 40-7 week 17 of last season, the likely nail in the coffin for Gerard Mayo, which opened the door for Mike Vrabel returning to New England. Obviously that's a vastly different team, and you'd certainly expect the league's top offense in many metrics to put up more than a touchdown here. Now, it won't happen with a bunch of explosive plays through the air most likely, as the Chargers are tied for the second fewest passes of 20 plus yards allowed, but they should have the full line healthy, and we did see the Texans throw it over the heads a couple of times for a defense that runs quarters variations at one of the higher rates of anyone in the league, if you can pull those safeties down and isolate the corners. The question here is how much the Pats' success on the ground is based on the weak schedule in that area over the past month since the bye week, compared to LA having defended the run as well as they have for the majority of the season. On the flip side, New England's run D significantly dropped off over the second half of the schedule, but it has been based around runs breaking through the second level thanks to the excellent tackling, which I highlighted a couple of weeks ago as well. Now, even though the Patriots don't have the pass rush to really punish what the Chargers have up front, as they rank near the bottom in overall pressure rates, I do believe they have more to throw at their opponents than when they could barely touch Herbert last season, especially with Milton Williams back in the lineup, and then not being able to pay as much attention to protecting the edges. So even though I don't see the Pats clearly having the upper hand in one particular area, they've been a better, more consistent team throughout the year, they're at home and healthy at this point, giving New England putting this one away in the fourth quarter. Next up with the 12-5 Buffalo Bills at the 13-4 Jacksonville Jaguars, arguably the prime matchup of the wildcard round. It's been more of an up and down season for the Bills standards, as their 5-year reign over the AFC East ended with a reascent of the Patriots. They pulled off an incredible week 1 comeback against the Ravens to spark a 4-0 start to the year, before they went 3-4 over the next 7, marked by the defense getting gashed on the ground, and 4 different games with 3 turnovers. The only loss the rest of the way came with Josh Allen having a rare miss on what would have been a game-winning 2-point conversion against the Eagles, but they weren't overly convincing in the wins either. In what many people would label a down season in some regards, due to ending up as a wildcard contender, this Bills offense did ultimately quietly finish 3rd in EP per play and 2nd in success rate overall. Josh hopped in and out of the MVP conversation at different points, as he did put the ball in harm's way in the middle part of the season, but more than evened it out with some nuclear performances. Brandon Cooks functioning as the number 1 receiver at times is a big reason for their instability, as they haven't been able to rely on any of the pieces extensively outside of Khalil Shakir and of course James Cook on the ground. And that has been a constant for them, that run game, as they finished as one of the only 2 offenses to average at least 5 yards per carry, along with the already eliminated Ravens. And they've converted red zone drives into 6 points at the 3rd highest rate league-wide at over 66%. The best version that we've seen from this offense can get into those heavier personnel sets, with rookie Jackson Hawes at tight end as the replacement for the 6th offensive lineman that they majored in last year, to hit defenses with body blows in the run game, and then allow Josh to just put the cape on a handful of times per game. That however brings us to the Bills defense, which has been a topic of concern this season. I actually posted a video nearly a couple of months ago by now, breaking down all of the issues fitting the run when it comes to personnel usage, how reactive they were, and individual shortcomings. Their success rate has slightly improved, but only the Giants have posted the worst EP per rush across the entirety of the season. Their angles and tackling from the safety spot in particular have been atrocious. Funnily enough, however, this is the only defense where it's nearly as effective if you run the ball against them compared to if you throw it, as they've allowed 5.1 yards per carry versus 5.3 net yards per dropback. In fact, they're the only units to allow just 1 completion of 40 plus yards for the air, with Joey Bosa reinvigorating his career, Buffalo has been top 5 in overall pressure rates, and when they put opponents into catch-up mode, those issues on the ground are largely mitigated. Across from them will be a Jaguars team that is coming in with all the momentum as part of a massive turnaround season under Liam Cohen and a completely overhauled leadership group. They racked up some big early season wins over the Texans, 49ers and Chiefs, but when they got utterly embarrassed by the Rams in London prior to the Week 8 bye, people were quick to dismiss them again. Yet since then, their only loss came at Houston, when Davis Mills fueled a furious comeback, which ultimately cost them the AFC's #1 seed. I wrote about Trevor Lawrence and his confidence in the Cohen offense a couple of weeks ago, if you want to dive even deeper into this topic, but I'll try to summarize it here. Over the past 6 weeks, Teal has been as good as any quarterback in the league, accounting for 19 touchdowns compared to only 1 interception. He's always been willing to hit his back foot and let it rip, but with the way his coaching staff creates cleaner pictures for him, with much improved route spacing, and how they've tapped into putting him more on the move, with a heavy dose of play action, he's really thrived. Part of that is also bringing in Jacoby Myers and the injured Brendan Strange returning as dependable targets over the middle of the field. Run game wise, I like what I saw early in the year of Cohen bringing this heavy personnel, gap-oriented scheme over from Tampa Bay, but they've relied more on the quarterback as the efficiency has dropped off for Travis Etienne and company. But now with Bashal Tutin back in the fold as a number 2, they can hit some explosives on the ground, especially if they lean more into the quarterback as part of that. Although we weren't quite sure what to expect from first-year Jags defensive coordinator Anthony Campanile coming over from Green Bay, even if he's adopted some of the principle of Jeff Hafley there, to me it's pretty clear what they want to be as a unit. This is the third best run defense based on success rates. They run a ton of zone coverage where they try to squeeze down windows and force mistakes, as only the Bears have come with more turnovers this season than the Jags tally of 31. That formula has worked exceptionally well, considering this is largely the same unit as he took over from 2024 personnel-wise, yet they've somehow risen from 31st all the way up to 5th in terms of EP per play allowed. So they sort of earned their way to obvious passing downs, where they almost are perfectly balanced in terms of middle of the field versus open looks, and now with a healthy Tron Walker back in the lineup, they can throw these different body types at offensive lines, relying on blitzes or simulated pressures at one of the lower reads in the league. Devin Lloyd's turnaround with his magnet for the ball and how he attacks the action in front of him has been a huge development at the span of this unit. And since I'll bring up some other kickers here, we do have to note that Cam Little has now set the all-time records for overall and outside for the longest field goals made in NFL history. So as I think about how these two sides match up, I can see a lot of pieces to this favor Jacksonville. They've been one of the best early down run defenses to counter how Buffalo wants to operate. Meanwhile, they have shown the capability of getting downhill themselves against the Bills' D-line that can be pushed off the ball, rather than opening up the door for penetration. The Jags have one of the best offenses when it comes to creating and attacking voids in zone coverage, even if these Bills have been vastly more man-heavy than in the past, while congesting at space defensively, and not allowing quarterbacks to become major factors as scramblers. If you just showed me the 7 AFC teams in alphabetical order and asked me who I'd pick to go to the Super Bowl, I could talk myself into the Bills as much as any of them, especially with how unpredictable that half of the bracket feels like, and they have the most battle-tested quarterback. But I just think this is a bad spot for them, and they're running into a Jags team that has been building up to this point. On top of that, I believe there's some internal pressure Buffalo might feel without the 3 biggest playoff enemies as part of the tournament, no Bengals, Ravens, and most importantly Chiefs. The Jags kinda don't know any better, and there'll be quite a drastic shift for the Bills in terms of conditions in Duval County, so I just think there are less questions about the Jags right now. Give me the home team. And finally, for the AFC here in round 1, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Hoodoo Magic that got them to 10-7, playing host to the 12-5 Houston Texans. For Houston, they've had one of the more drastic turnarounds in recent memory, entering the postseason on a 9-game winning streak after they began the year with 3 straight losses. Davis Mills stepped up when jumping in for a few weeks at quarterback, but more importantly, they've really started to lean into the dominant defense, with CJ Stroud delivering some big-time throws in key moments. So again, the overall season numbers certainly leave you wanting more offensively, and I wouldn't say that this unit has been able to put together 4 quarters of quality football in many weeks. They finished the regular season ranked 28th in offensive success rate, with by far the least efficient run game of any team left in the field. But again, being able to rely upon their defense to such a capacity, they sort of altered their approach, where they may have taken some shots early on to potentially get the lead, and then not force the issue the rest of the way. The Texans turned the ball over the second fewest times of any team in the league at 12 apiece, and the one area they certainly show growth in is keeping the quarterback upright by having more comprehensive protection plans and the investment of the running backs to put the face mask into the chest of blitzing linebackers. They've displayed improvement in that regard as well, but this was a borderline historically better offense in terms of short yardage situations, and they ended up finishing red zone trips into touchdowns at the third lowest read league-wide at just over 46%. So I'm interested in if they may continue to open things up a little bit more with trust about what's going up front and the development of those young ancillary receivers around Nico Collins. Defensively, Houston just dropped to second behind the Seahawks in terms of points allowed for the season when they gave up 30 for the first time all year to the Riley Leonard-led Colts of all teams due to sitting down most starters for the second half of the contest. Previously, they had held opponents on an average of just 16.6 points per game, and the way they do it, as you look at the various numbers and charts, such as the one provided by Cody Alexander of Match Quarters, is unlike a lot of the great modern defenses that rely on being unpredictable or having all these different answers. They're in the big nickel package constantly, they let their four guys up front attack, and all 11 defenders swarm to the ball like a pack of wild dogs with rabies. I dedicated a segment of my Thanksgiving themed video to Will Anderson Jr. and Daniel Hunter as the premier duo coming off the edges, but those corners get in the face of guys on the outside. Jalen Petrie is the enforcer that makes receivers worry about where he's coming from before extending for the ball, and Kalen Bullock being a rangy ball hawk to collect errant throws make them a nightmare opponent. Altogether, only the Bears have posted a better turnover differential than Houston's plus 17, and another number I love to bring up as sort of a running bit here, the Texans led the league in the Hellos for Football Talk statistic, as they on average start their drives 5.1 yards ahead of their opponents. For the Steelers, it looked like they might finally get out of the pit of the Mike Tomlin mediocrity when they started the year of 4-1, but in several matchups where it felt like they needed to step up, they fell flat. Even after ripping off 3 wins in a row, including at Baltimore and Detroit, they decided to prioritize keeping Myles Garrett from breaking the all-time sack record or putting together anything resembling an NFL offense in Week 17. Yet they came out on top of that crazy finish to the rematch with the Ravens, watching a potential game-winning field goal by Baltimore's rookie kicker sail wide right. The one main thing I want to highlight about this Pittsburgh offense is how much more reliable his run game has become under Arthur Smith. After Jaylen Warren showed off his big play potential on a pair of breakaway runs against the Lions, it was the steady drumbeat he provided as a physical force that kept him on schedule for most of Week 18. You can see the vision behind this O-line largely consisting of draft picks coming together, as they have quietly risen to 6th in rushing success rate at 44%. Now, a different story can be told about this aerial attack, if we can really even call it that. Aaron Rodgers may work the go ball with DK Metcalf in the lineup, or hit Calvin Austin the occasional double move, but this has been a very limited group with the way the 42-year-old quarterback wants to operate, combined with the limited pass-catching talent. As I pointed out last week, he's tied with the Browns' Dylan Gabriel for an NFL low 6.4 yards average depth of targets among quarterbacks with 200 plus dropbacks, and only also benched Tua Tagovailoa had a lower time to throw among qualifiers. This regular season finale may have been Rodgers' best showing, however. The running backs have been heavily involved with pass catchers, and they do get DK back from suspension. Defensively, we've gone away from the Blitzburg days, as they're just outside the top 5 when it comes to that, and for good reason, as we saw when Lamar Jackson was able to hang in there and find a couple of wide open receivers for long touchdowns in the regular season finale. Veteran Jalen Ramsey was one of those guys who ended up getting cooked, and for some of the bright moments with the move to safety, he hasn't been the same when left on an island in coverage. Generally, a shift towards much more zone coverage to keep the ball in front of them has been pivotal, as they finished the season with the third most missed tackles as a team, according to Pro Football Reference, and then they throw these unscouted looks at opponents once they get them into obvious passing situations. When they have Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, and now rookie Derek Harmon on the field together, they can really clog up those interior rush lanes, where it's been more about the lack of contained discipline hurting them. They constantly get their hands on the ball at the line, and we just saw TJ Watt being in the right spot for one of those, as one of the great big play creators we've ever seen. As always, they thrived in winning the turnover battle, as they finished at a plus 12 for the season, and other than the shocking missed PT that they were lucky wasn't punished by the Ravens at the end of that affair, the kicker Chris Boswell has been called a killer by his own head coach for good reason. Now, as I think about how these two sides want to operate and what I can envision this battle looking like, both sides will be focused on not allowing the opposing defense to make those game-changing plays. I'd expect a fairly conservative game plan here early on especially, and then when they feel like they can't catch the counterparts up too close, they take their shot. Unfortunately for Pittsburgh, I don't really see why anything they've done can really lure in this Texans D. Theoretically, there are chances to be had, by the nature of how much they put on those corners, but Rodgers will get the ball out in less than 2.5 seconds on a majority of snaps, and then there's maybe no other unit better at rallying to it than this group on the other side. Even if Rodgers does connect with DK for a big play early on, I'm not sure if it changes what Houston does defensively a whole lot. They haven't allowed anyone to really scare them away from it pretty much all season, But if they can turn this into a shotgun game for CJ Stroud and make him hold onto the ball with muddy pictures, you have those speed rushers off the edge against these big tackles. That's where they could turn this game, along with maybe a tip pass. I think the Texans can ride Woody Marks enough to keep play action a factor, get that early lead, and allow DeMeco Ryans' crazy bunch of dogs to hunt. Switching conferences, we start off with round 3 of an NFC North Classic, as the unlikely 2 seed Chicago Bears at 11-6 have the 9-7-1 Green Bay Packers coming to town. Which for the Packers to come in as the team at the bottom of the bracket, not having won in a month, can't feel great. Sure, they completely punted in week 18 against the Vikings when they look at who was playing and how they just tried to run out the clock, but for a team that had previously not lost the game by more than 3 points, to lose Micah Parsons to a torn ACL and having to get Jordan Love back up to speed quickly here, it's certainly not an optimal setup. Now let's start off positive here. If you were to take out that meaningless week 18 contest with QB3 Clayton Tune at the helm, Green Bay would be tied with the Patriots for number 1 in EP per play offensively. Even though the run game of Josh Jacobs hasn't been as consistent on a down-to-down basis, their approach of handling explosive through the air while limiting turnovers make them a dangerous group. Having said that, I do believe Jordan Love was playing at about as high a level as he ever has, until that incredible interception by Patrick Surtain in Denver swung that game, and he got banged up the following week. With Christian Watson looking as fast as ever, coming off injury, and Jalen Reed returning as that gadget player, they can stress you vertically and horizontally in a way that allows the quarterback to hit you with paper cuts as well. Again, the lack of 10+ yard runs has been prevalent, but I could see Matt LaFleur lean more into those sleight of hand misdirection plays in the backfield, again with a healthy read, and maybe utilize QB2 Malik Willis in certain packages to give them a boost. They're also the only offense in the 49ers range when it comes to converting third downs at nearly 49%. Defensively, the loss of Micah Parsons looms large of course. You can absolutely feel the lack of that true number 1 chess-piece style of play as part of the pass rush, not only in his individual production, but also what it opened up for those guys around him. Across those 3 final meaningful games, when you look at the metrics, they're in a category of the likes of the Cowboys, Jets and Dolphins. The most alarming part of this, however, was week 17, when they still had an outside shot at the NFC North, but they allowed Derrick Henry to gash them for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. With how much they rely upon 2 high safety looks and asking those guys to fit from depth, offenses that are committed to punishing those soft box counts can really give them trouble here in January. That's why I think we may see Jeff Hafley tap more into getting the linebackers downhill with some early down blitzes and as part of the pressure plan. Chicago, on the other hand, has reason to be happy about how they've turned things around in year 1 under Ben Johnson, but I'm sure they're not satisfied with the way they closed out the regular season, coming out just short in the shootout at San Francisco, and then failing to avenge their early season loss to the Lions, when they were down 16-0 until turning things around in the 4th quarter. You could certainly feel the impact Johnson has had on the culture of the Windy City, making them a much tougher, more resilient group that led the NFL with 6 4th quarter comebacks. For as much excitement as there was around Caleb Williams entering year 2, with all the investments they made among the pass catching group, with the new head coach, considering the success as a play call in Detroit previously, where they've really made their mark, has been right in that run game, which they've continued to add to. That's another topic I highly suggest you check out my All-22 breakdown video on, if you're interested, but they finished the regular season with the 3rd highest rushing success rate at over 46%, thanks to all the layers to it, and how hard DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai are running right now. Caleb being a threat to pull the ball on bootlegs and make big time throws on the move certainly aids that, and while the pass game has had its ups and downs, he's a major threat as a scrambler as well. This past week, I thought he was actually on the money for the most part, but was let down by the guys on the receiving end routinely. But in the cold weather, they can typically rely on the ground game, the quarterback is capable of running hard, and they've turned the ball over less than any other team in the league at just 11. The other side of the coin is this defense that can drive you insane at times. Injuries at different points have certainly played their part, but they've been responsible for by far the highest yards per play average of anyone left in the playoff field at 6 point flat. The 49ers are the next closest, by the way, at 5.6 per. We just saw the Lions move the ball at will on them before stalling the red zone a couple of times. However, Chicago also finished with an NFL high 33 takeaways, with highly opportunistic guys in the back 7, with better passes and collector and throws. Montez Sweat did just hit double-digit sacks, but the X factor to pay attention to here might be Austin Booker off the opposite edge, and if he can deliver a splash rotating in. I need to see DC Dennis Allen show some more resistance to support an offense that revolves around ball control. If they can ride the wave and continue to win the turnover battle, that will provide them those extra possessions, but there's a lot of volatility connected to that, and only Denver has posted a worse difference in penalty yards for versus against them this season. Still, for as much as I don't like the feel of either one of these franchises right now, I believe Chicago has the formula to put together the best performance against their arch nemesis here. They've been able to run the ball on just about anybody, while Green Bay has looked the most vulnerable in that area here down the stretch. Not having Micah's speed to crash off the backside, and more importantly the pressure he can provide when they get to those defined dropback settings, is a huge factor. I can certainly see Jordan Love and company put stress on his Bears defense, and maybe isolate those safeties, forcing them to flip and run with guys, rather than being able to see and attack the football. If they can hit them over the top a couple times early, that would really open things up for them, but I also know Love will give them a chance or two to come down with those as well. And then not only can Chicago play keep away, but I think rookies Colston Loveland, Luther Burden being bigger pieces of this now makes them a tougher group to prepare for. I think this one comes down to the wire, and even though it may not be as dramatic as the dagger in overtime to DJ Moore, Caleb gets a chance in the fourth quarter to attack off play action and secure the home victory against the wounded Packers squad. Moving along to the 12-5 San Francisco 49ers, who just had a chance to earn a bye week and forced the rest of the conference to come to them, now suddenly is the 6th seed having to travel to the 11-6 Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, the Niners had a chance to secure a home field advantage throughout the entirety of the playoffs, with Super Bowl 60 set in Santa Clara, if they had been able to sweep the Seahawks in Week 18, but the visitors were able to cool off their red-hot offense in a major way, securing a 13-3 victory after San Francisco had just won a 6th straight game, as part of a season in which they've been without the two best defenders in Nick Bosa and Fred Warner for the most part, as well as having missed key offensive contributors for significant chunks. So what they've done here down the stretch especially certainly received a damper by Seattle, but it's still pretty remarkable how good they've been this year yet again. The Niners finished behind only the Rams in offensive DVOA, and they've scored on the highest rate of their drives of any team left in the playoff field at 47.6%. In part because they can stay ahead of the sticks and avoid third down altogether, they've converted the highest rate league-wide at just under 50%. When they have the full complement of skill position players available, the way they can space the field and put stress on opponents as they get all 5 eligibles in the pattern, with a versatile weapon like Christian McCaffrey as a receiver, they can dictate terms to the majority of defenses they may face. On top of all the schematic advantages they create, as Kyle Shanahan took a step forward in how he utilizes motion at the snap in the pass game, Brock Purdy offers a playmaking capacity that can bail them out on the few downs they don't win early. Having said that, while the patience with the run game has paid off, and they found better success through more variety on the ground, they did finish with the third lowest average yards per carry across the entirety of the season at just 3.8 yards a clip. The real problem child, however, has been this defense. San Francisco just edged out the Panthers for the title as the worst defense in the playoff field according to expected points added, and they're pretty close in several other categories. They did at least finally hit the 20 mark this past week, but no other team sacked the quarterback less than these 49ers without Bosa coming off the edge, and they're one of only 6 defenses to allow opposing quarterbacks to log a passer rating of 100 plus against them for the season. Now, defensive coordinator Robert Saleh deserves credit for at least somewhat holding that unit together despite a myriad of injuries, leaning a little more into man coverage and high stunt rates, but at some point just simply missing the horses. I'll be interested to see if they can throw off the playoff opponents with one or more of these one-off game plans to hopefully create some disruption, but that's a unit I'm pretty worried about. And let's also bring up that Eddie Pinheiro's only miss on the season among 29 field goal attempts came on a 64-yarder to close out the half against the Colts, so he's been pretty much automatic. For Philly, this definitely hasn't been a joyride, with all the media distractions, in part self-inflicted to be fair, dealing with attrition, the offense feeling stale at times, simply not reaching anywhere close to that dominance they showed during their run to Super Bowl 59, and yet to play host here to a familiar foe, as a team that is kind of refining their identity, leaning on the defense and protecting the football. The Panthers, who we'll get to in a couple of minutes here, are kind of in a tier of their own in the negative sense when it comes to various offensive metrics, but the two stats they're back-to-back with the Eagles at is percentage of drives ending up in points at just 35% for Philly and third down conversion rate at 37%. They've simply had stretches where they've struggled to stack conversions on top of one another, with Jalen Hurts early in the year not being willing to pull the trigger on tight window throws and struggle to find solutions against the blitz as of recent. If you leave those 2-star receivers one-on-one, they can still quickly punish you for it, and Jalen's legs have become a bigger factor again. Where they simply aren't the same at all as last year is the run game. Saquon Barkley set an all-time record in total rushing yards, if include the playoffs, but whether it's a lack of conceptual diversity, missing pieces along the O-line, or just being predictable overall, they haven't really been able to get things going, which is reflected in significantly worse before contact numbers. When they do get into scoring range though, the Eagles did easily lead the league, with converting 70.5% of the red zone trips into touchdowns. While you could figure out some schematic shifts for this Philly D, I was surprised to find out that they quietly are right up there for how often they run man coverage this season, and have moved closer to average in terms of blitz rate, after they were one of the cloud heaviest teams in the league last year. That of course has invited a little more volatility, as they were only one completion of 40 plus yards away from tying the Cowboys atop the league defensively in that regards in a negative sense at 13 such plays, in particular when you look at how they've struggled to solve that second outside corner spot when they put Cooper DeJean at the nickel. The combination of Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean back from injury, and Jahad Campbell gives them options at linebacker by deploying those guys as blitzers or making the rookie the pole runner in split safety coverages when they do bail out of the pressure looks. And then with Jalen Carter back in the lineup as your ace, you see these different guys take advantage of one-on-ones on the edges, including Jalen Phillips, who has been the most effective player on the edge since they traded for him. And in contrast to what I brought up for kickers on San Francisco's side, Jake Elliott has been surprisingly shaky this year, only converting on 74% of field goals, not nearly banging those long tries at his usual rate. Obviously, there's a lot of familiarity between these two franchises, considering they've collectively represented the NFC in each of the last 3 Super Bowls, with the Eagles beating up on the Niners in the 2023 Conference Championship game when they didn't have an actual quarterback available early on that day, only for Shanahan to absolutely shred them when they met them the following regular season. Personally, I believe no other team would have benefited more from getting that 1 seed and having a week off in San Francisco, now when Ricky Pearsall battling for another injury, and Purdy getting knocked out, similar to what we saw in the NFC title game 3 years ago, this past Saturday night. Since they didn't meet last year and he previously spent time on the AFC side, we haven't seen Vic Fangio go up against Shanahan since the former was still in Chicago back in 2018. The defensive mastermind has had some pretty good success when they have gone head to head, and against this style of offense altogether. Now, the Niners have evolved into a quite different looking attack, but I don't see Philly getting caught out of position regularly, unless all of those receiving options are fully healthy, and they can exploit man coverage to some degree, paired with a far superior Eagles offense in terms of pure talent on the field, getting a chance to catch some rhythm again. I just don't envision the Niners pulling off the upset at Lincoln Financial Field. Would be a tough finish to a season where they vastly exceeded expectations, but give me Philly here. And last and possibly least, unfortunately, because we have the only division champs with a sub 500 record in the 8-9 Carolina Panthers, playing host to the 12-5 Los Angeles Rams, who right off the bat do not make any enemies here and ignore the most important fact, they shockingly lose at Carolina back in week 13 as massive favorites. If you'd asked me and most objective NFL fans 3 weeks ago who would be my pick to win it all this year, we would have all had a tough time going with anyone but the Rams, unless you thought the Seahawks had the upper hand in that upcoming Thursday night matchup that ultimately determined who's the number 1 seed. Seattle put together an incredible comeback, which only followed up by a horrible first half against the Falcons that they weren't able to overcome before closing out strong against the lost Cardinals team. Offensively, this group has been lighting the league on fire for the better part of the season. They led the NFL with 30.5 points per game and 6.2 yards per play. Although on a larger sample size, Matt Stafford ended up overtaking Drake May for a league-leading 72 completions of 20 plus yards, and he's the current favorite for MVP in arguably his best season as a pro, but his supporting cast in the play caller Sean McVay has only elevated the veteran's outstanding performance. We're well familiar with all the incredible combat catches Puka Nacua finds ways to come down with, how they've weaponized the illusion of insert blocks to give their receivers free access and play action, and how heavily they've leaned into 13 personnel groupings. Their 30.5% usage rate was more than double of the next closest team. But this is the only unit to hit a 50% success rate on designed run plays, with a duo of almost identical backs they can rotate through. When they don't get Devontae Adams back, they are basically impossible to stop at the goal line, because they can punch it in as well as anyone, but if you leave that guy one-on-one on the backside, he's simply as good as anyone at creating that quick separation and finishing catches. An interesting development for LA this season has McVay's mind kind of been incepted by the idea of not having a kicker that he can rely upon as much, even if Harrison Beavis has been very solid from short and medium range, to become more aggressive on 4th downs, and it's made them even more efficient. As for the Rams defense, a bad second half against the Seahawks and a horrendous first half against the Falcons in 2 of the final 3 weeks have hurt them a little bit, but this unit still ranks exactly 7th in both EPA per play and success rate, and they're even higher if you account for a tough schedule. This defensive line has game-wrecking potential thanks to all the high draft picks they've invested into that group and how well they play off each other. Let's also give DC Crushula a ton of credit here, however, for how he's been able to tie the back end together with a bunch of smart defensive backs who understand how to pattern match, communicate, and seem incredibly well prepared in order to anticipate what's coming. They've run dime personnel on over 32% of snaps this season, nearly 1.5 times as much as any other team across the league, and they're about to get a shot in the arm with Quentin Lake returning, who's been a revelation for them this season. They've been a top 3 red zone defense percentage wise, and Nate Landman in the middle of that unit has specialized in punching the ball out when given chances. Also, no team has been responsible for fewer penalty yards than this group. As for the Panthers side, it's a lot more confounding what they are and how they even made it here. They weren't actually able to finish off the regular season with 10 straight weeks of alternating between wins and losses when they traveled to Tampa Bay this past weekend and came up short. Yet the Falcons coming out on top of the meaningless other NFC South battle the following Sunday for them created a three-way tie that favored them over the Bucs in terms of tiebreakers. Now, getting to host a playoff contest, in part because only the Broncos have finished more than the 6-game winning drives, does have to feel like a win for Dave Canales' staff. As you go through various metrics, you see a significant separation from Carolina to the rest of the pack. They finished 27th league-wide in points per game at 18.3 and tied for 26th at 5 yards per play. We could go into a variety of more specific categories, but in the heart they want to be a ball control offense that rides the two at the backfield and doesn't put Bryce into a ton of defined dropback settings, while creating some cleaner pictures for him to work the quick game when they do go to spread out formations early on. Rookie Tetra McMillan is the ace, who they can rely upon on the backside of the formation, but benefits from being moved around as more of a zone beater as well. And Bryce has provided some heroic moments if you give him one-on-ones on 4th down, as well as using his suddenness to extend plays. Meanwhile, you can certainly find flaws with the Panthers defense as well, considering they're near the bottom of the league when it comes to pressure rates and overall efficiency, especially when facing more well-balanced opponents. One element I highlighted in my Week 18 preview, and even before that, is that they disguise coverage at one of the highest rates in the league. These aren't some of the craziest looks you've ever seen, but they constantly rotate guys post-snap and force quarterbacks to either reevaluate or put the ball in harm's way, where they have some very smart DBs like a JC Horn, who are actively looking to work off the landmarks. With the presence of Derek Brown in the middle of that unit, Hornets have found more success attacking the edges in the run game and hitting cutbacks. Although rookie Knox Gordon has jumped out to me as a physical edge setter recently, they did just drop the 2nd worst in 3rd down defense in the NFL at just over 47%, which could be deadly against how Stafford can pick those zone-heavy units apart. When these two sides met 6 weeks ago, Stafford threw a pick 6 to Mike Jackson, another interception into the end zone, and he got strip sacked by Brown late, combined with Rice lofting the ball to his receivers for long touchdowns on a pair of 4th downs. I have a tough time seeing even half of that happening again in the rematch. Carolina was never really able to stop their counterparts unless they turned the ball over, as they were able to move the ball through the air and on the ground to great success. I envision a similar story in this one, while they may lean even heavier into the rushing attack early on, use heavy personnel sets to simplify what the Panthers are doing on the back end, and also work with isolated matchups when they can create those. Meanwhile, the Panthers haven't nearly been as effective or committed to their ground game, and we just saw the Bucs make them fairly one-dimensional, with T-Mac as the only guy that can really punish one-on-one coverage. While the D-line for LA has the advantage the more the opponents drop back, I don't see Shula exposing his corner to the same capacity, and even if it turns into a more high-scoring affair, that's clearly advantage Rams, because I simply don't see the firepower for Carolina to keep up in that kind of environment. Give me LA big in this one. This has us moving on to the Divisional Round, and I will start with the 2-1 seeds on either side here to kind of introduce them as well, which for the AFC, with the Texans traveling to the 14-3 Denver Broncos. As for this top-seeded Denver team, things haven't always been pretty, but the only loss since September 21st came at the hands of the Jaguars 3 weeks ago. They've shown a capacity to play down to the competition at times, but they've also come out on top against some of the league's best. And they've not only shown they can win different types of contests, but they've been clutch late in games, having led the NFL with 7 game-winning drives. The offensive side of the ball has certainly been connected to more volatility, starting at the quarterback position with Bo Nix. He absolutely has his warts of not always playing on time, how he responds to pressure, and B-Man's accuracy down the field, and yet he's consistently found a way to elevate his level of play late in games when his team is needed him most. And some of the limitations from a design perspective go back to Sean Payton cutting the field in half with boots and rollouts, which aren't always necessary and in a playoff environment may not be possible anyway. This is a highly unpredictable passing attack when it comes to who they feature on a weekly basis, but the constant for them has been the offensive line, which has received the league's highest pass blocking grade in PFF, and the 7th highest in terms of run blocking. Now, the latter part of that hasn't been as efficient since J.K. Dobbins got injured, but rookie RJ Harvey provides them some big potential as a two-way player, and the veteran is set to make his return by the time we get to the divisional round. Plus, since the shaky week 1, they've given the ball away less than once per game on average, which is to support a defense that has once again been close to the top of the league in many meaningful metrics. Only the Texans and the Seahawks have given up fewer points this season, and the Broncos actually finished number 1 at just 4.5 yards per play, as a group that has been responsible for a few more big plays, but has been as good as any on a down-to-down basis, even if the takeaways are down compared to their counterparts atop the league. When they have Pat Surtain in the lineup, they truly have the advantage against just about any number one receiver of a team they may be facing here, yet DC Vance Joseph has gone away from being as blitz happy as he's been at times in the past. Instead, it's the threat of the extra rushers that has allowed them to manipulate protections and tighten the coverages in a way that makes opposing quarterbacks guess constantly, while you have these speedballs like Nick Bonito shooting off the edges, along with the big bodies pushing the pocket on the interior. For most of the season, Denver was on pace to beat the all-time single-season sack record for defense, and they still easily finished atop the league at 64. The addition of Talanoa Hufanga as a maniac who shows up everywhere on the field has provided them even further flexibility. If you want to survive at mile high against those guys, you have to have a semblance of a run game to avoid 3rd and long, which won't be easy because they're also second best league-wide in terms of rushing success rate allowed. One big negative, no team has given up more free yardage to their opponents via penalties. This will be an incredible defensive slobber knocker for supremacy in the AFC. These two units do it in quite different ways, as already outlined, where the Texans are much more straightforward with bringing 4 and plenty of twists, while Vance wants to shift games towards the quarterback and throw the kitchen sink at that guy. Both defenses have the advantage of the respective unit that they'll be facing, where the Texans can make Bo Nix uncomfortable in that space back there and bring out his worst qualities, while the Broncos will present a different level of challenge than what Houston has seen throughout the year, really testing how far they've come along and shoring up the protection plans. Run game wise, Denver has a definite advantage, although I'm curious to see if the Miko company adopts some of the strategies we've seen from teams facing the Broncos, using a bunch of early down blitzes and forcing on bad decisions by the young running back. That's where potentially getting Dobbins back could really make a difference. As I think about the challenges for either side, I do believe Denver is a little more equipped to handle those. Vance excels at making opponents waste bodies in protection, and suddenly the picture has changed, with a rookie receiver or two having to adjust on the fly as well. Plus they can stick Surtain onto Nico in those big moments when they do man up and try to get a free rush on CJ. I know the Texans only lost by a field goal back in week 9, when they were without the starting quarterback for more than half, but that was at Houston, and the Broncos were able to hit those couple of big plays that really made the difference on both sides of the ball, having to travel to Mile High with 2 mad scientists, including Sean Payton, who'll cook up 1 or 2 designs we haven't seen on tape, making those DBs run with motion at the snap to give those speedy receivers a step. I think they'll do enough on those to swing the tide in their favor and survive at home. And the 2-3 matchup on this side of the bracket, the Jaguars at the Patriots, I immediately had to think back to the 2017-18 AFC Championship game, where a couple of bad whistles might have cost Black Bortles and company a trip to the Super Bowl, as crazy as that sounds now. Obviously the cast of characters involved here is completely different, I won't make too much out of a mid-October affair from last season, and these are 2 up-and-coming teams that are probably thinking, why not us? Trevor Lawrence and Drake May are about as hot as any quarterbacks in this playoff field, and they figured out how they want to operate offensively. What's interesting here is that with the Jaguars run game having sputtered a bit over the second half of the season, against the Patriots run D that has at least been equally concerning, while New England's own run game took off over the last month, thanks in part due to a softer schedule against the Jacksonville defensive front that has made life tough on runners throughout the season. How much can May test the Jags' zone-heavy defense early on by pushing the ball vertically in order to create air within the coverage, and how much time will he even have to set up those deep shots? To me, even though Jacksonville is closer to the bottom overall sack total, those guys can really condense the pocket to not give the quarterback openings to maneuver around, and with how Josh Hines Allen is playing right now, he's a mismatch whenever left one-on-one with either tackle. I expect plenty of chips coming his way, but I think on those handful of opportunities that he does have, he'll be able to get home once or twice. Meanwhile, I believe New England will stick Gonzo onto Jacoby Myers to take away Trevor's security blanket, but this feels like a game where Brian Thomas Jr. catches a deep ball along the sideline, and Cohen is able to make those Pats backers that want to live between tackles have to chase their backs on the perimeter. Advantage Jags, and I think they continue the Cinderella-like run with a big win at Foxborough. Flipping over to the NFC again, with the 14-3 Seattle Seahawks joining the conversation and getting to host a familiar foe in the Rams, with the season series tied at 1 apiece so far. Seattle controlled their own destiny pretty much all season long, despite the 3 total losses coming by a combined 9 points, with all of them happening before Thanksgiving. It felt like for a moment that we were in for quite a different looking playoff picture, when the Rams were up by 16 points at Seattle midway through the 4th quarter of their Week 16 Thursday night game, yet they were able to put together one of the wackiest comebacks I've ever seen, and just stomp the 49ers at their place to secure the first round bye. While we had a pretty good idea that the Hawks would make another jump defensively in year 2 under Mike McDonald, we didn't really know what to expect from Clint Kubiak, taking over the offense, swapping out Geno Smith for Sam Darnold, and moving on for a pair of long-term veteran receivers. Nobody could have prepared us for this becoming one of the most explosive aerial assaults across the league. Darnold led the field with 12 completions of 40 plus yards, and only the Patriots averaged a higher net yards per dropback at 7.6 per, with Jackson Smith and Jigba having developed into an all-round superstar receiver who they can put anywhere across the formation, and his gravity truly dictates how opponents have to play them. The most encouraging development for this offense as of recent, however, has been the run game having more life, rather than simply being an end to the means for the aggressive play-action attack. Efficiency-wise, they don't blow you away still, but they quietly finished with the second most carries of 20 plus yards for the regular season at 18. The one major blemish, only the Vikings, who had some comical moments of handing the other team the ball, ended up turning the ball over more than Seattle's 28. Now, on the flip side of this, if you needed any indication of how exceptional McDonald's defense has been this season, they just held the 49ers to a lowest point total at 3 since the very first game of the Kyle Shanahan era in San Francisco, and that was with those guys coming off 3 straight games of scoring 37 plus. That also allowed the Seahawks to sneak ahead of Houston for the title of the league's top unit in terms of points allowed at just 17.2 per game. Despite running nickel personnel with Nick Emanwari in that hyper-specific big slot role, as outlined last week in my preview of the rematch with San Francisco, at the second highest rate in the league, this has been the best defense in the league against the run by any metric you want to look at. So they can stick with their preferred personnel groupings, not being forced to match and potentially have miscommunication with any rules. They run a bunch of stunts on those early downs to push opponents behind the chains, and then they have one of the baddest collections of dudes up front who simply want to devastate quarterbacks. They can muddy up the front when it's time to drop back, but it's how well connected that entire unit is, how quickly they redirect based on how the pattern develops, and the ferocity when they arrive at the ball that's truly remarkable. Seattle also finished with the league's second highest DVOA on special teams, by the way, in part thanks to that game-winning punt return touchdown when last facing the Rams. On the impact of their comeback, setting up game number 3 now in Seattle, these two teams are in a tier of their own in terms of FTN's schedule-adjusted DVOA metric. For context, the Rams are slightly behind for second at 39.5%, team number 3 sits at just 21.4%. And that's not the ultimate measure of course, but it has proven to be very predictive of future success, especially when the gap is this large. And I've viewed these as the top 2 teams myself for a long time now, so there's a good chance that whoever comes out on top of this one has a strong case to go the distance. Having said that, there are so many ways to skin this cat that I don't want to go crazy before we definitely know that we get this game, at least already in the divisional round. We have the number 1 offense against the number 1 defense league-wide, and after McDonald proved victorious over Kyle Shanahan in week 18, Sean McVay now has his shot at proving he's the preeminent play call in the game today. For as exceptional as Kyle's been, the Rams simply have the horses, unlike San Francisco. When they have those 2 standard receivers available, and more prevalent, they were the one offense that could really punish the Hawks wanting to live in the big nickel personnel when they put those 3 tight ends out there and just controlled them on the ground in the first half. Seattle was much more effective after that, when they were in those 5-2 fronts with Emanwari, becoming your de facto outside linebacker or one of those tight ends, and you had a safety already walking up to act as that +1 in the box. So I could see McVay tap into more play action from those looks, and of course having Devontae who can work those isolated matchups with your single receiver, that can change the math of it all. Darnold can't wait until the 4th quarter to turn on this time around, as the Rams were able to fool him on a couple of occasions with these defenders dropping off the line late, and I believe with Quentin Blake back in the fold, that gives LA even more options. So I hate to do it because this should really be the NFC title game, but I'm going with the 1 seed getting eliminated here. And we get another regular season rematch, when this time the Eagles have to travel to Chicago, after the Bears kinda showed that they're for real when they won in Philadelphia on the Black Friday game 6 weeks ago by now. We've talked about both sides here individually already, let's focus on the first time we saw these 2 teams face off. Chicago ran the ball 47 times for 281 yards that day. I analyzed several clips from that game as part of my video titled "The Bears Will Run For Your Face," and what really stood out to me was how they controlled those backside edge defenders with different action coming towards them, the way they froze the second level of motion before and after the snap to change up rules, and just great uncertainty throughout that Philly D. Of course, Caleb hit a couple of big throws off play action to go along with that. Now, what's the response from Vic Fangio? Do they just attack more rather than being forced to react constantly? Or do they create a game plan that involves late front shifts of their own to mess up blocking angles? I have a tough time seeing Ben Johnson outwit the long-term DC to such an extent again, and there may be more onus put on Caleb to pull the ball off that run action and either hit somebody working across or take off himself if they crash with the backside. I also expect the Eagles offense to have more success with extra opportunities. They actually posted a 47% rushing success rate that day, but they need to do a better job if Chicago is that aggressive towards the point of attack and surrenders contain of sneaking out a tight end or making Hurts a factor to keep the ball other than your classic zone reads. And then to kind of back up the defense, they need to take advantage of Chicago using middle of the field close structures at the top 3 rate. A.J. Brown made a great play on a double move for a long touchdown at one point, but I want to see more of these timing-based routes on the perimeter, where Jalen doesn't have to overthink things, along with hitting guys on crossers from under center play action. I believe we see enough of that, not allowing Chicago to control the clock to the same extent, this time at Soldier Field, and Vic having an ace up his sleeve to force one big errant throw late that his defense comes up with to seal the win. Which now leaves us with the final 4 of the Jaguars at the Broncos and the Rams at the Eagles. Kinda the new kids on the block on the AFC side of the bracket, to go with the Divisional Round rematch from last year, where LA came closest to actually stopping Philly on the way to last year's Super Bowl. Firstly, the Jaguars at the Broncos. Even if you were a giant Broncos believer, I don't think anybody would have predicted this matchup to decide who's coming out the AFC, especially considering all the great quarterbacks we're accustomed to seeing on this stage. But as I went through the exercise, I simply believe these are the 2 best, or at least most complete teams in the conference. We have Liam Cohen having revitalized Trevor Lawrence's career, thanks to how tremendous he's been at creating cleaner pictures, against Vance Joseph at the height of his powers, considering how he's been able to take those away, if you allow him to turn this into a drop-back heavy game. This could be a slow burner because neither side wants to expose the quarterbacks to those kind of conditions, where they both run into a wall regularly, facing the number 2 and 3 defenses in rushing success rate respectively. Can either play caller offensively set the table with some kind of counteraction, or make a linebacker take the wrong step for an explosive play on the ground and provide themselves some breathing room. Both kickers can take advantage of the thin air in Denver on long kicks, although Cam Little's range may be unlimited a mile high from what we've seen this season, and special teams are absolutely a factor in this kind of matchup, as both sides were top 5 in punt return average for the regular season. I see 2 very evenly matched teams, even though the Jags did win at Denver 3 weeks ago, rather conservative offensive game plans early on, but then I will once again lean on the experience of Peyton and his veteran coaching staff on this massive stage, to have that one-up in terms of game management, trust the defense that has been more consistent throughout the year, that crowd firing them up on 3rd downs, and Trevor throwing a late pick to send them back to the Super Bowl, reminiscent of when they last went there as part of Peyton Manning's Siren Song in 2015-16, carried by the no-fly zone. And on the other side, the 5-seeded Rams at the 3-seeded Eagles, a rematch of last year's Divisional Round matchup as already mentioned, which the Eagles narrowly escaped as Saquon Barkley ripped off a couple of long touchdowns, and then Jalen Carter closed things out by putting pressure on Matthew Stafford on the final 2 defensive plays. But no other team tested Philly as much as LA did over the course of their 16-game streak to end the season, where the only game they lost came on the final play on a day that they were without Jalen Hurts for all but the first drive. He had a really tough showing against those Rams, and was Jared Verse for cementing himself as not just the defensive rookie of the year, but one of the great edge rushers in the league already. Although it's not quite the Seattle defense, having to travel to Philly, and with the history of McVay going up against Fangio, this won't be an easy test by any means. Unlike last year, when this was still a very zone-heavy unit, now it'll be more up to Devontae and Puka defeating Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean one-on-one. Meanwhile, the Eagles' run game hasn't been nearly functioning at the same level as a year ago, and even then it was more about 3 big plays on the ground, rather than moving the ball with the same level of down-to-down consistency. So with Philly being so 11 personnel centric, and the Rams wanting to live in nickel or even dime, with all the safeties being excellent tacklers, this to me definitely plays in the visitors' hands. If the Eagles are going to put points on the board, it'll be about AJ and Devontae dunking on those corners, who have shown they're vulnerable when left on islands, maybe with an extra tight end on the field to pull in the defense. Only 2 teams in the league didn't have a 4th quarter comeback or game-winning drive this season. These 2 opponents have only done it once each, in part because they've largely played with the lead. So if it comes down to who has the ball last in this stage, that'll be very interesting which side can close out the contest. And maybe this time it's Harrison Mevis not having that final field goal blocked. Rams go back to the Super Bowl. Which leaves us with the final matchup of the Denver Broncos against the Los Angeles Rams in Santa Clara, which, believe it or not, is the first time we've seen Sean Payton going up against Sean McVay since week 2 of 2019 on the heels of that infamous NFC Championship game, where the Rams got away with a blatant missed defensive pass interference call in New Orleans that in part led to the league making that a reviewable penalty for a season, but more importantly cost Payton his 2nd trip to the Super Bowl and paved the way for McVay to learn his lesson against the Patriots on the game's biggest stage, before he was able to redeem himself a couple of years later with a different quarterback now in Matt Stafford. For as good as those 2 defenses the Rams will have just faced are, I'd say they were more so modern, solution-oriented units, while this would be the ultimate battle of who can have the pen last in a war of dictating terms to your opponents. looking at what Vance Joseph has done with the Broncos this season. Seeing Pat Surtain versus Devontae Adams match up once more will be pure cinema, and this should be a heavy Puka game, as he and Stafford try to figure out all the things Denver throws their way. Those guys have been outstanding defending 13 personnel on the limited sample size, so this may be more about being able to run the ball from 3 wide receiver sets and digging out safeties on insert blocks before throwing a change up their way and they go play fake. On the other side, with that excellent Broncos O-line going up against the vaunted Rams front, can Chris Shula toss in a handful of change-ups and fool Denver's second-year quarterback, where they show man at the snap and then suddenly jump out into a window that both kind of predetermines hitting? Denver being more multi-tight end heavy recently aligns with LA kind of struggling against those looks, as they'd much rather put an extra DB on the field over a linebacker, where they may try to limit possessions by going heavy and focusing on the run yet again. For as much as the Broncos can ride that defense and late game heroics at Mile High, with both special teams being pretty even, as I think about the 4 other units, offense and defense for each team, it's pretty clear to me that the Rams have 2 of the top 3. They're very familiar with the stadium, and even though the rest of the team has been overhauled quite a bit, the quarterback and head coach were on the biggest stage together 4 years ago, the marriage is as beautiful as it's ever been, and they lifted the Lombardi Trophy together for a second time. Rams get it done. And that's gonna do it for the 2025-26 playoff predictions. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this extensive breakdown of every team and matchup in the tournament, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe for more of my content, and maybe let me know in the comments who you have facing off in Super Bowl 60, or one of these games you just feel really good about. This was a lot of work, as you can probably imagine, but even if I don't get all the picks correct, I hope you appreciate the info and learn some things as we're about to kick off a wild postseason. I'll be back next week with something a little bit different, my all-rookie team for the season, in written form or on my site hellotofootballtalk.com. Would love for you to check that out as well, and maybe some of the other stuff I've published previously. You can subscribe there as well if you like, for free, to get an email whenever I post anything, and of course feel free to follow me on social media. Links for all that are down below in the video description. Looking forward to hearing from you guys, and hopefully we're in for a really exciting next month. So until then, see you later. Peace!